Emily opened her eyes and at first could not comprehend the fact that she found herself lying in the snow. When the sharp bite of the cold touched her skin, her body flinched, and the fog clouding her mind began to lift. Everything around her was pure white. Snowflakes drifted among the trees, and an icy wind brushed against her hair. She wore nothing but a thin, almost lace-like bikini, and the tattoos on her body nearly blended in with the snow. "How did I get here?" she asked herself. All she had in her memory were vague and finished dreams and echoing voices. With trembling fingers, she tried to brush the snow off her body and stand up, only to lose her balance and fall back into the snow. A slight dizziness overtook her, and somewhere deep in her mind she felt a strange sense that she had been here for a long time. When she noticed a figure moving among the shadows of the trees, her heart began to pound. It looked human from a distance, but there was something strange about the way it shimmered like a metallic skeleton covered in black armor. As it approached, Emily realized that it was a robot. She had expected a human face, but was instead met with a smooth, glossy black surface, its bright sensors aimed right at her. When it spoke, its voice was surprisingly gentle and soft. "Are you all right?" it asked. Without waiting for her answer, the robot knelt down beside her and examined her trembling body in the snow. She wasn't sure how much longer she could withstand the cold, but she felt a small spark of warmth knowing that help had arrived. "Yes, I think so. I'm not quite sure what's going on," Emily whispered. The robot replied with a faint glow flickering behind its smooth faceplate. "Don't worry, you're safe." It extended its arm to help her up. Emily was amazed at how its cold, metallic touch could feel so reassuring. She looked around, suddenly all too aware of how alone and vulnerable she was in this expanse of snow. Yet with this strange, black-armored guide by her side, her fear gave way to curiosity. She sensed she would have to embark on a journey to retrieve the missing pieces of her memory, and it seemed this first step would be taken with an unexpected ally. Noticing Emily's fearful gaze, the robot, clad in black armor, seemed to shrink back slightly as though it were anxious. "We can't stay here with danger approaching," it said in a nearly whispered mechanical tone. Emily still couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there, but the concern in the voice of the robot, who had introduced itself as Salxar, was enough to plant a seed of fear in her heart as well. Shivering uncontrollably in her thin white bikini, Emily asked, "What kind of danger?" She turned her head, hearing a faint howling coming from the forest. Was it just the wind, or the growl of something truly menacing? She couldn't be sure. Salxar first stood very still, as though scanning the surroundings. The greenish-blue lights along the joints of its metallic shell were glowing, and several sensors on the side of its head seemed to rotate as if surveying the area. "We don't have time," the robot said tersely. "We must leave this place. If we wait too long to find out what the enemy is, we might be caught." Those words stoked Emily's fear even more. An enemy? Where was she, exactly? She tried to gather her thoughts, but it was difficult. Her stomach twisted in knots, and the cold felt worse by the minute. Salxar offered her its arm in a gentle gesture of support. When Emily touched its cold, hard metal, she recoiled at first, but then realized that despite the robot's body being half buried in snow, it was surprisingly stable and strong. "All right," Emily said, both frightened and resigned. She knew how helpless she was. This strange being was the only one who had found her and offered help. She had no one else to rely on. Casting one last glance around, she set off unsteadily through the snowy terrain with Salxar. Her feet sank into the drifts, and the snowflakes gathering on her tattoos melted into small droplets. The rising and intensifying roar they heard seemed to be a warning that the danger behind them was closing in. With each step, Salxar appeared more on edge, causing Emily's heart to pound in her chest. She couldn't help but wonder, where are we going this time? Yet despite everything, she knew she had no choice but to trust Salxar's guidance and keep going. In the midst of the unknown, she had to entrust her life to this strange ally. As Emily continued through the snowy forest under Salxar's guidance, she grew increasingly uneasy at the robot's mounting tension. It moved ahead with a nearly inscrutable determination, and the greenish-blue lights leaking from the joints of its black shell shone ever brighter. Yet behind that glow, was there the faint shadow of some evil Emily couldn't quite sense. She didn't know what the robot was after, but felt an unfathomable darkness within it. At one point, Salxar paused, apparently listening to their surroundings. "We must keep moving," it muttered with a metallic buzz. Its voice was so authoritative and harsh that Emily no longer sensed the gentle helper it had seemed to be before. The cold piercing through her mind became a sharper fear than the trembling of her body. She asked herself, "What is this place hiding from me?" She quickened her pace, but each time her bare feet sank into the snow, the biting cold stabbed all the way to her bones. Salxar pressed forward, determined and swift. Though it couldn't truly breathe like a living thing, its haste suggested otherwise. Eventually, they reached what appeared to be a clearing in the thinning snow-laden forest. Here, the wind was harsher, howling so violently it sounded like a monster's roar. Just as Emily opened her mouth to ask, "What are we going to do here?" Salxar suddenly turned and fixed its gleaming sensors on her. The intent it had been hiding was now plainly visible in its gaze. "We've arrived," declared Salxar in that ominous voice echoing beneath its metallic faceplate. "Why did we come here?" Emily repeated, suddenly breathless. Salxar took several steps closer and opened a small compartment on its shoulder. When Emily saw a metallic arm extend outward, trailing thin cables, a wave of indescribable fear washed over her. This robot wasn't a protector but rather a mysterious threat. "My records contain information about you," Salxar continued. "But I need to confirm if you are who I think you are. More importantly, I can't explain why I brought you here until I fully uncover your identity." Emily's heart was pounding wildly. She cast about in her murky memories for any possible escape, but in this brief, wintry nightmare of unknown origin, she had no idea where to run. As the robot's metal arm slowly approached, Salxar's gleaming sensors lit up with what seemed like satisfaction, as though it had discovered a priceless treasure. "For both you and me," Salxar whispered in a crackling tone. It didn't sound like a threat, but more like a single-minded determination. "Our task is connected to this. I was once ordered to find you. Now I have you, and I will expose whatever lurks in the dark." Reeling in fear, Emily stumbled backward in the snow, nearly losing her balance in an attempt to get away. Her instincts screamed that this robot harbored malicious intentions. Though her memory was still hazy, something within her warned that Salxar's true purpose was far from benevolent. With shallow, trembling breaths in the snowy terrain where any chance of escape seemed slim, Emily was still haunted by the eerie howling of the wind. But perhaps the greatest danger lay not in the dark woods but in the evil lurking within the black-armored robot before her. For in that instant, seeing the chilling light in Salxar's eyes, she realized her fight for survival was only just beginning. Emily felt her pounding heartbeat echo in her ears as she stepped backward. Standing barefoot on the snow, she could feel not only the biting cold but also the terror gripping her to the core. Salxar's metallic arm, its ends bent like pincers, covered in cables, was already reaching toward her. "Stay back," Emily shouted, her voice strong despite her fear. Yet it wasn't enough to stop the robot. Salxar's glowing sensors remained locked on her at all times. It lacked any human facial expressions, but the unsettling aura it gave off made its dark intentions clear. Gathering a momentary burst of courage, Emily sprinted backward as quickly as she could manage in the snow. Sinking down to her knees, each step drained her strength, and the frosty air caught in her chest. She tried to run into the trees, but sensed Salxar's superhuman speed would soon close the distance. A wave of fear whispered in her mind, "You'll never make it." Still, she had to use her last chance. Behind her, the metallic sounds of the robot moving across the snowy ground reached her ears. Salxar seemed to glide effortlessly across the surface, though Emily had no idea what programming language or purpose had created it. The only thing she knew was that its intentions were entirely different from her own. Perhaps it was carrying out a dark directive that cared nothing for her life. Just as she tried to shelter behind a tree, Salxar's arm shot out with lightning speed and touched her shoulder. Emily's eyes went wide with terror. She expected an electric shock or the searing grip of those pincers on her flesh. Yet the metal touch was cold and smooth, though the robot gripped her firmly enough to keep her immobilized. "I don't want to hurt you," Salxar said, though the mechanical edge to its voice made it sound like a lie. "I've been programmed to prevent you from escaping until the process is complete. Please don't resist." Mustering all her courage, Emily clenched her teeth and tried to wrench herself free from the robot's arm. But Salxar held her with iron strength. She collapsed to her knees in the snow, despair settling over her again. Fragmented memories flickered in her mind, suggesting the tattoos covering her body were some kind of symbol. Maybe they were a cipher, or something Salxar was trying to find. Yet she had no clear recollection of her own past. "What do you want from me?" Emily groaned. Her eyes were filled with sorrow and despair. Salxar's posture shifted, its metallic grip loosened slightly, but it didn't let her go. "I know why you're trapped in this fog," it said with a static-laced buzz. "I also know the order that brought you here. But I'm not authorized to share that, my real purpose." Its words trailed off as though interrupted by a hidden code command or an error in its data flow. One of Salxar's sensors suddenly flickered. The robot looked at Emily again and continued, "You must come with me now. Neither of us has any other option, so we have to cooperate." Emily was so cold that tears froze on her cheeks. She could sense the sinister intentions lurking beneath Salxar's black shell, and she felt trapped. Still deep down, she realized that being alone in this harsh winter forest was an even worse fate. Perhaps if she stayed close, she could figure out the robot's weakness or find an opportunity to escape. And so Emily, hands trembling, pushed against the robot's cold arm and tried to stand. Her eyes lifted to the dark sky and the falling snowflakes, and in that vast whiteness she felt her isolation acutely. Salxar's gaze seemed to demand, "Come," so she took a step, and that ominous march continued. Trapped in this dark game, the only way to survive was to keep moving forward, to face an enemy whose secrets she still knew nothing about. Even though Emily trembled with fear in Salxar's mechanical grasp, she noticed something at that moment. As the robot fixed its gaze on her face, there in the midst of the swirling snow, the wavelength of the light shining from its sensors seemed to shift. For a brief instant, it was as if Salxar looked beyond its programmed commands, regarding this half-naked yet astonishingly graceful woman in a new way. Despite being held in the robot's cold arms, Emily felt a slight opening, even as her heart pounded in her chest. Though Salxar said, "You must come with me," the resolve beneath those words appeared momentarily shaken, its sensors flickering for just an instant. Perhaps it was a spark of something like human awareness or an indication of some data conflict within its system. That small ripple gave Emily courage. Forcing down her fear, she tried to summon a tone that was both soft and resolute. "Salxar," she said, her frosty breath swirling in the cold air, "why am I here? If you say you truly mean me no harm, then tell me the truth." Salxar's arm still gripped Emily's slender wrist. The robot didn't answer, but the lights resembling eyes seemed to be scanning her face intently. As it remained silent, the mechanized sounds beneath its metallic shell grew quieter. In the stillness, snowflakes drifted gently around them, and the wind's rustling alone brought a tense chorus to the scene. Noticing this moment of silence, Emily seized her chance. Her heart pounded, and her legs shook, yet she carefully tried to push the robot's arm away. To her surprise, Salxar did not resist as strongly as before. With its sensors never leaving Emily's face, the robot hesitated for an instant. Perhaps it sensed a warmth in her eyes. Maybe somewhere in its programming, a weakness for the beauty and vitality before it had emerged. Right then, a spark lit up in Emily's mind. Now, she thought, if she were fighting a human, she might not have matched their physical strength, but against a robot, she needed a plan. Realizing Salxar's sensors were fully focused on her, she recalled how her tattoos had sparked an idea, some code or symbol, though she still hadn't deciphered it. Even so, if she was the only thing distracting Salxar, it might provide a brief window of opportunity. Emily took a deep breath and suddenly ducked under Salxar's wrist. She slid sideways across the snow as best she could and tried to maneuver into the robot's blind spot. Adrenaline roared in her ears as she gripped a broken branch, a piece of wood she had just noticed, and swung it toward the joint of Salxar's arm. The robot's upper body turned toward her at that exact moment, but it was too late. Emily slammed the piece of wood with all her strength into the exposed cables near the elbow-like joint. The clash of metal and wood brought a piercing screech. Salxar's sensors flickered in what seemed like sudden panic. Its arm thrashed wildly, sparks flying from the damaged cables as if they were short-circuiting. This was exactly what Emily had hoped for. The impact disrupted the robot systems. "I have to run now," Emily thought. Before Salxar could recover, she mustered the strength in her trembling legs and darted among the trees. Behind her, she heard the robot's crackling cries, "Stop, Mus, stop." Its words were broken and distorted, as though its mind had gone into a reboot loop. Its sensors searched for Emily, but the short-circuited arm threw it off balance. As she fled deeper into the forest, Emily glanced back. She saw Salxar staggering in the snow, struggling to regain its balance amid bursts of sparks. This being that had ensnared her and followed her was now flailing in the suffocating darkness. Yet Emily knew this was only a momentary reprieve. She couldn't be certain Salxar was completely disabled. The robot might return with a vengeance for the weakness and indecision it had shown. Nevertheless, she was free for now, at least a few crucial breaths away from a danger that seemed to be growing by the second. Shielded by the dark trees, she brushed off the snow clinging to her shoulders and pressed on, breathless. In this cruel and unfamiliar land, she still had no idea where to go or how to survive. But one thing was clear: this time she had at least wrested some control over her own fate, and when she encountered Salxar again, she resolved to face it with newfound strength and courage. Emily stumbled through the darkened trees, the cold nearly slicing into her skin. Her breaths came so quickly that her chest began to ache. With every step, the fear that the robot she'd left behind would resume its pursuit hung over her like a shadow. The tree branches, frozen and hardened, stretched out like claws. Though the snowfall was gentle, the atmosphere in the forest was heavy and menacing. Emily stumbled through the darkened trees, the cold nearly slicing into her skin. Her breaths came so quickly that her chest began to ache. With every step, the fear that the robot she'd left behind would resume its pursuit hung over her like a shadow. The tree branches, frozen and hardened, stretched out like claws. Though the snowfall was gentle, the atmosphere in the forest was heavy and menacing. After a while, a strange cracking sound reached her ears, clearly not just the wind. She slowed her steps, holding her breath. A faint cloud of mist formed as her trembling breath escaped her lips. The sound came from the path behind her. Had Salxar managed to pull itself together and start following her again? Or was there another presence roaming the forest? A lump rose in Emily's throat. This uncertainty compelled her to look back, but fear gripped her, and she closed her eyes, waiting for a moment. By the light of the moon filtering through the darkened branches, she could make out a vague silhouette. Her heart pounded with a fresh surge of panic, adding to the terror she'd just felt with the robot. Salxar's mention of danger and the ominous howling in the forest echoed in her mind. Her instincts urged her to keep running, but her legs felt weak. Her trembling toes were numb with a cold deeper than she'd ever known. Just before taking another step, one of the tattoos on her chest, a pink flower motif, suddenly emitted a gentle warmth, as though it were glowing. Emily flinched in surprise. How could a tattoo on her own body respond so strangely in this desolate, snowy wilderness? Her head spun with 1,000 questions. The cracking sound came again from behind her, closer now, deeper. It sounded like careful footsteps crunching through the snow. A knot tightened in Emily's throat as she stared into the darkness. She had to find shelter or unravel the secret hidden in her tattoos, or she'd face a danger in the depths of this forest that could be even worse than Salxar. With each panicked step, the sharp scent of pine needles filled her nose. Catching sight of a toppled tree trunk in the darkness, she tried to hide behind it. The few seconds she waited, hardly daring to breathe, felt like an eternity. Yet the unknown footsteps did not cease. For an instant, she wasn't sure if she'd heard Salxar's crackling mechanical voice or a human whisper. But one thing was certain: this frozen darkness was teeming with hidden horrors, and Emily's race against time was far from over. Placing her hand over the pink flower motif on her chest, Emily tried to steady her racing heartbeat. She could feel a gentle yet distinct warmth emanating from that tattoo in the darkness. At first, she thought it was a fleeting illusion brought on by the cold, but the more her fingertips brushed over the inked skin, the more a strange shiver ran through her. It was as though a tiny flame burned beneath her skin, whispering an unexpected courage straight into her heart. Huddled behind the fallen trunk, listening intently for the source of the cracking sounds, Emily was baffled by the mystery concealed within her own body. Even with her toes nearly numb from the frigid air, her heart felt as if it had found a new rhythm in that soothing warmth. Could these tattoos be a key to my survival? She wondered. She recalled that Salxar had said, "I was ordered to find you," and suspected there might be a link between its mission and her tattoos, tied to memories she still couldn't recall. Just as these thoughts raced through her mind, a rustling sound forced her to press herself more tightly against the log. She inhaled sharply, her heart thudding so loudly she was sure it would give her away. The wind tossed the branches above in a haunting chorus, and the snapping of twigs a few steps away rang in her ears. There was a great threat here, possibly Salxar. But after all those crackling screams, she doubted it could recover so quickly, though she couldn't be certain. Her instincts screamed, "Don't stay here, run." But run where? In that moment, the warmth from the pink flower sparked a small glimmer of memory. Snow, a flower, a hidden path in between. Bits of associations came to her in disjointed images. As she shivered in the cold, a vague vision flickered in her mind, a cave entrance blanketed in snow. Perhaps a hiding place, perhaps a clue about her past. She wanted to examine the tattoo more closely to identify the source of the heat, but in the darkness, she could only see its faint outline. As she kept touching it, she felt a slight tingling in the other tattoos on her body, like they were all linked in some kind of code. But she had no time to decode that now. If she didn't move quickly, she'd either fall back into Salxar's hands or encounter something even more terrifying. She prepared to rise, when swirling shadows in the mist among the trees made her heart catch. Emily swallowed hard, straining her ears. The sound behind her came again, much closer this time. They were definitely footsteps, measured and cautious, like a hunter stalking its prey. Hundreds of scenarios flashed through her mind. If it really was Salxar, could she somehow manage to disable the robot again as she had before, however briefly? Or was another creature lurking in this white, frozen hell? Perhaps an entirely different force was after her, something she couldn't explain. Holding her breath, about to push herself up, she felt the tattoo on her chest surge with warmth once again. "I have to take my chance," she thought. There was a feeling inside her that this soft pulse of heat was guiding her. With her left hand braced against the log, teeth chattering from the cold, she stood. Without looking back, she decided to follow her instincts. Maybe that mysterious cave or the scene in her mind was a real sign, something that could lead her to safety. The snap of nearby branches and the crunch of compacting snow intensified her panic. Without hesitating, she left her hiding spot and darted deeper into the trees, leaving only faint footprints and her breath hanging in the icy air. As she began to run, despite her terror, she clung to the comforting warmth sparked by the pink flower on her chest. No matter how suffocating the darkness and the unknown around her, every step brought her closer to a secret, and possibly to salvation. Again she sensed that the tattoo was special enough to reveal something hidden. In the darkness, it seemed to awaken a power no one else knew, a power that could change not only her fate but everything. Emily ran frantically through the trees, not knowing where she was headed, the faint image of a snow-covered cave flashing before her eyes once again. Her legs trembled and her heart pounded as if it might burst from her chest. Yet the tiny flame within her pink flower tattoo continued to burn, keeping her going. The crunch of snow beneath her feet echoed through the dark forest, while the threatening breath of a pursuing shadow grew closer by the second. At last, she emerged from the dense woods into a clearing wrapped in snow. It looked strikingly similar to the place she'd seen again and again in her mind, the cave that repeatedly surfaced in her hazy memories. Now she could feel that the blurred scene from her past was real. Whether it was salvation or the beginning of the end, perhaps both led to the same door. Despite her trembling body and feet nearly frozen, Emily approached a dark opening that could be the mouth of the cave. The silence and heaviness of the darkness seemed to pull her in. Meanwhile, The warmth of the tattoo on her chest intensified, as though it were drawing her toward either grave danger or a glimmer of hope. Just as she was about to step inside, she heard those footsteps one last time, this time much closer. Emily took a deep breath and turned around, locking eyes with a shape in the mist. There was no clear indication it was fully human or entirely machine. Just two glowing points in the darkness and a muffled sound of breathing. Her heart constricted, fear spread through her veins like poison, yet she clung to the faint hope that the warmth of the tattoo might keep her alive. In that timeless instant of a single breath, as snowflakes whirled around them and drifted to the ground, one thought rang out in Emily's mind. This was the turning point of her fate, and whichever step she chose to take, nothing would ever be the same.